Hey, what's up guys? Rhino Rates Music here, and we are back with our annual year-end list. And of course, in this video, I'm going to be finally going through my top 50 best albums of 2024. Now, a lot of people have already made this list. I may be a little bit later than others. I just wanted to spend a bit more time compiling this list, going over a few albums a few extra times, and because I had a busy Christmas, so sorry for the wait, but it's finally up, and my list is probably not too special compared to other lists, but I still would like to share them. So of course, 2024 was such a busy year for music, lots of great stuff that came out from all different genres, and that's why I wanted to try and keep my list as varied as possible, and as a result of that, this was one of the toughest lists for me to make, because a lot of great albums that I love missed this list that I might go through in another video on my TikTok, which I'm sure most of you guys are likely hear from, but I'm finally done with my list and I'm pretty happy with it, so that's why I'm going to share it here. Now, of course, just like in the other video, we're going to be skimming through 50 to 16 because otherwise this video would be too long, and then talk more extensively about the top 15. So without further ado, here are my top 50 favorite albums of 2024. So starting things off at the number 50 spot, it is Gene Dawson with Glimmer of God, probably his most versatile and varied album to date. At the number 49 spot, we have Anderson .Paak and Knowledge teaming up for their album Why Loud by No Worries. At the number 48 spot, it is Clairo with Charm. At the number 47 spot, it is The Smile with their sophomore album Wall of Eyes. At the number 46 spot, we have Blood Incantation, one of the most colourful and varied metal albums I've heard all year, Absolute Elsewhere. And at the number 45 spot, it is Vince Staples with one of his best albums to date, Dark Times. At the number 44 spot, it is Allie X coming through with one of the best throwback 80s style albums of this year with Girl With No Face. And at the number 43 spot, we have Hiatus Coyote with Love Heart Cheat Code. At the number 42 spot, it is Denzel Curry with King of the Mischievous South Volume 2, which may not be his most lyrically thought-provoking album or one of his most subtle albums, but this is one of his most banging albums, as it shows him basically going back to the Memphis rap era and just basically doing that sound justice. He does it so well that he could almost fit into this era, especially with all the features as well. At the number 41 spot, we have Gary Clark Jr. with his versatile and psychedelic JPEG Raw. At the number 40 spot, it is Violet Pony with Monarch of Monsters. If you told me last year that I'd be including a Violet Pony album on my best albums of the year list, I'd probably have a hard time believing you, because while I haven't disliked Violet Pony's music, her blends of electronic, hardcore, and digicore have not always been for me. Even though I've liked some of their songs, I haven't loved all of them, but this album shows them going in a more metal and noise rock direction. I think they do it really well. Coming at number 39 spot, we have Justice with their best album since the debut, Hyperdrama. At the number 38 spot, it is Chat Pile with their very eerie and scary and hard-hitting Cool World. And at number 37 spot, we have King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with one of their funnest albums to date, Flight B741. At number 36 spot, we have Colin Stetson with The Love It Took to Leave You, which is one of the best minimalist drone albums I've heard this year. At number 35 spot, it is Car with presumably his final album before his sudden and tragic death, The Thief Next to Jesus, also one of the best and most conscious hip-hop albums I've heard this year. At the number 34 spot, it is Rachel Chinariwi with a very solid debut album, What a Devastating Turn of Events. At the number 33 spot, it is the Lemon Twigs with A Dream Is All We Know. At the number 32 spot, of course, we have Beyonce's country throwback on Cowboy Carter. At the number 31 spot, we have probably Father John Misty's best album since Pure Comedy with Mahash Mashana. At number 30 spot, it is Galiuchis with Orquídeas. Number 29 spot, it is Glass Beach with their very abstract, exuberant, but gorgeous Plastic Death. And the number 28 spot, one of the most underrated hip-hop albums I've heard this year, I'm talking about Lip Critic with Hex Dealer. If you like a mix of industrial hip-hop, hardcore, and also a bit of punk music, this album will be right up your alley. At the number 27 spot is easily one of the best and most hard-hitting metal albums this year with Knocked Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To. At the number 26 spot, we have Kieran J. Callanan with If I Could Sing. At the number 25 spot, it is Billie Eilish with Hit Me Hard and Soft, easily her best album since her debut album, and probably her most mature as well. At the number 24 spot, we have Tyler, the Creator, with Chromacopia, which may not be his best album to date, but definitely continues his absolutely insane and consistent streak of great albums, and is one of his most personal albums to date. At the number 23 spot, it is one of the best pop and soul albums of this year. I'm talking about Remy Wolf with Big Ideas. At the number 22 spot, we have Godspeed You, Black Emperor, with the album No Title, as of 22nd of February 2024, 28,340 dead. Obviously, that title being a heavy and quite impactful reference to the atrocities, war crimes, and genocide that Israel continue to conflict onto Palestine, and that Western governments continue to fund. Free Palestine. At the number 21 spot, it is Civerous with one of the best and most colourful metal albums this year with Maze Envy. And at the number 20 spot, Kendrick Lamar with GNX. At the number 19 spot, we have easily one of the best singer-songwriter albums with Adrianne Lenker's Bright Future. At the number 18 spot, it is Quedeca with Scrapyard, a Leftovers album / mixtape that's so good it might be even better than his actual album. At the number 17 spot, it is Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds continuing their consistency, and Nick Cave bringing in themes of mortality, acceptance, and spirituality on Wild God, which is one of my personal favorites, as a lot of the themes on this album really resonate with me quite a lot. At the number 16 spot is Julia Holter with Something in the Room She Moves, and at the number 15 spot, it is The Last Dinner Party with Prelude to Ecstasy, which I'm going to slow down right here and talk about some of these albums. Yeah, this is easily not only an album filled with banger after banger after banger, and not only is it one of the best throwback albums with elements of glam rock, glam pop from the 80s, as well as a bit of pop rock from the 70s, and also a bit of a 2000s appeal from bands like Scissor Sisters, but it's also quite a thought-provoking album that tackles on themes of femininity as well as sexism and also unrealistic perceptions on women. Just, yeah, if that album appeals to you based on the sound of its lyrics and you like those styles of music, or even if you're not a big fan of those styles of music, I would highly recommend this album still. At the number 14 spot, an album that I still have to read off of to remember the title, it is Shoo Shoo with 13-inch Frank Beltrame Italian stiletto with bison horn grips. Yes, a mouthful of an album, but also would be quite an earful to listen to for some people. Although if you're just getting into Shoo Shoo, this is a good album to start with because it incorporates a lot of the elements of like horror music, and also with Jamie Stewart's iconic vocals that has a mix between eeriness and also a sense of mourning. It's got everything you'd want a Shoo Shoo album, but it is actually also quite accessible for a Shoo Shoo album as it incorporates elements of art rock, post-rock, neo-psychedelia, as well as freak folk as well. If that really is in your lane, then this album will most definitely appeal to you. While some of the highs on this album may not be as high as the highs on some earlier Shoo Shoo albums, nor is this album as maybe creative or as scary as albums like Girl with Basket of Fruit, this is definitely still an album worth listening to because this is an album that's still not for the faint of heart, but at the same time, I think you will get a lot out of it if this is your first time exploring a Shoo Shoo album. At the number 13 spot, we have Mount Eerie coming through with Night Palaces, which is not only an album that rivals some of Phil Elverum's best work, yes, even The Glow Part 2, which is like my all-time favorite album, but this is also an album that showcases Phil reflecting on themes that he's already expressed in his music, from themes of death, mortality, as well as interacting with nature and also the environment. There are also some references on this album to climate change, and this also shows Phil coming to terms with certain, I guess, explanations or conclusions as to why things may be the way they are. So there are still a lot of elements that you would expect from Phil Elverum's lyrics in his earlier stuff, but he provides a bit more of a mature perspective on this. And the album's also got a really great flow and still sonically sounds beautiful, lo-fi, exuberant, just everything you could want out of a Mount Eerie / Phil Elverum album, I would say. At the number 12 spot, it is one of the most underrated albums of this year. I'm talking about MGMT with Loss of Life. Like, I still don't get some of the hate for this album, honestly. I've seen some people saying that this is probably MGMT's weakest album, as if their self-title doesn't exist. And I've seen some people say that this album just doesn't hold up to some of MGMT's more classic stuff, nor is it as catchy. And while, yes, I would agree that, yeah, obviously this album is not as catchy as some of the hits from their debut album, nor is it maybe as versatile as Congratulations, it's not trying to be. This is an album that, for MGMT, still has a lot of their elements of psychedelic pop and neo-soul, but sonically this album also incorporates elements of dream pop as well as folk music and art rock, but does it in a way that is a bit more abstract, that may not be appealing to the ears at first. Even though I'd argue there are still some catchy songs on this album like Bubblegum Dog and Nothing to Declare. This is an album that lyrically as well can also probably has some themes around death and also coming to terms with the fact that the world is just going to continue moving faster than we are and there's nothing we can do about it and nothing that can prepare us for the loss of life. So yeah, I think all these abstract themes lyrically that tie in really well with some of these more abstract but also beautiful, dreamy, and creative instrumentals makes this a highlight in MGMT's discography, in my opinion, even if it's not the kind of MGMT album that fans of their debut album would love for its catchiness as well as its sticky hooks, or even fans of Congratulations with its more vibrant production and more multi-faceted pathways. But you know what? It doesn't need to be, and I love it for that. I love this album a lot. Coming at number 11 spot, just short of the top 10, it is Brittany Howard with What Now, which an album I almost forgot how good it is. Not only is this album catchy, captivating, and colorful, but this album also has an incredible flow, great songwriting, reflecting on themes such as love, longing, and also questioning of where somebody may be when it comes to being in a relationship. I love the transitions on all these tracks, how we get a little bit of like an ambient outro on a lot of these tracks that melds in perfectly with the next track that just gives this album an beautiful flow that, yeah, may blend into each other a little bit, but I kind of feel like that's kind of the vibe of this album. It's just everything kind of goes together, but doesn't at the same time. That gives you an idea of just how smooth this album flows, yet how much is going on with it. Brittany Howard's vocal performances still sound incredible. The drums, the production of this album is spectacular. And yeah, once again, just a very colorful album, and I definitely think blows her debut album out of the water. Alright, starting off in the top 10, at the number 10 spot, we have the man, Porter Robinson with Smile. Man, the way this album grew on me is just insane. While I always liked it, I felt like I could continue getting more and more out of it after every listen, but not in terms of where I'm uncovering new details about some of the aesthetics or the instrumentals. I'm talking about in terms of one of those things where if you get it, you get it kind of thing. And that's kind of what happens as you listen to this album more and more. It shows Porter in a place where he wants to be able to express himself as an artist and still be able to please his fans, and he still admires a lot of the admiration, the accolades, the attention, and also the praise he gets for his music. He does crave a lot of that stuff, but at the same time, he finds himself at a place where he's under pressure from that a little bit. But rather than kind of sinking into that pressure, he's kind of doing something that's fun to him, but at the same time coming out with one of the catchiest and most colorful pop-adjacent records of this year. That may not be as colorful per se as Nurture, and may not appeal to some of the music hipsters as much as Nurture or even Worlds, but it definitely just has that appeal that Porter Robinson is an artist that isn't just for the people, but is also for himself, and he will continue to be that. And yeah, like the title says, a lot of tracks, a lot of the hooks on this album just really put a smile on my face. Whether you're talking about tracks like Cheerleader, Easier to Love, Mona Lisa with Frost Children, which is one of Porter Robinson's best songs, or all of those are some of his best songs. And yeah, this was the album, once it started growing me more and more, that solidified the fact that I'm not just a Porter Robinson fan, I'm a guy who's going to see him live. So I can't wait to see him live and see some of these tracks being played live in February. Coming in at the number 9 spot, we have Kamasi Washington with Fearless Movement. Firstly, how did Fantano only give this album a 6 out of 10? Secondly, my god, the details, the performances, the band chemistry, the passages, the layering on this album is just incredible. And not just that, not only does this album continue to explore those elements of jazz funk and spiritual jazz that Kamasi is known for from albums like The Epic, but he dives in a bit more than that, covering elements of funk and jazz rap, especially on that hip-hop track that is just insane in my opinion. And also a bit of vocal contributions on tracks from artists such as BJ the Chicago Kid, and while Get Lit with George Clinton may not be his best track yet, it does at least just showcase how versatile this album is and how fun it actually is. It's an album that's a bit less, that the highs on it may not be as high as albums like The Epic, but it's not as patience testing. But at the same time, some of the highlights on here are just still incredible, and that you don't really need as much patience for, but it just takes you in a lot of these tracks. It immerses you, and that's what I love about it. Alright, coming in at number 8 spot, we have More Mother with The Great Bailout. I did not expect this album to chart as high as it did, but from this album's incredible production that comes across as both beautiful and eerie and scary at the same time, as More Mother and some collabs on this album that give this album even more personality, do a great job at discussing the true history, the true implications, and the true events that went on during the abolition of slavery in the UK, but not portraying it in a way where a lot of historians like to sugarcoat it and call it a pretty benevolent and also revolutionary moment for the UK government. But no, basically stating that it was something that was forced, where white people, the ones who were previously slave owners, had to be compensated, doing things like tackling those, as well as the monarchy during the Victorian era, and just also saying that there is absolutely no way that the people who suffered the most during this horrible time in history have ever been fully compensated. No one has even cared to fully compensate these people who suffered greatly during these times. They just cared about fulfilling those gaps that the rich white folks had to face. And it's just the way it's uncovered with absolutely no sugarcoating whatsoever, and the way it's done with More Mother's iconic spoken word poetic deliveries, and also the musical aspects, the way it all ties in together, and just basically getting a history lesson within an album. And I love history myself, and I love music, and I think this album somehow balances those two factors perfectly.
Hello, Rhino Rates Music and Editing version here, and I can't believe that I missed the number 7 spot, which is JPEG Mafia's I Lay Down My Life For You. Man, Peggy just never misses lately when it comes to new albums, and while this may not be my favorite JPEG Mafia album, the rock direction he took on this album I think was really great, on tracks like the opening track, as well as G.I. Joe, the Peggy-style tracks like Sin Miado, as well as Don't Rely on Other Men are great. The collab tracks, especially the Denzel track, is amazing, and I hope they do an entire collab album together. And the softer tracks on the back end are amazing too. So, yeah, I think this album just has a great flow, great performances, great lyrics. Some of Peggy's best, I would say, even if it's not his best album aesthetically. But the fact that it's still making the top 10 is impressive. So yeah, I Lay Down My Life For You coming in at number 7, but I somehow missed it on my piece of paper when I was making the video. So sorry about that. Back to the real video.
Coming in at number 6 spot, we have easily one of the most beautiful singer-songwriter albums of this year. I'm talking about Laura Marling with Patterns in Repeat. I didn't think she could top her last album, but somehow she did, with production and vocal performances that are equally as beautiful, as immersive and simple, yet vibrant and clean as on this album. But some of the songwriting on this album too, especially on songs such as Child of Mine, Carolyn, and No One's Gonna Love You Like I Can, just absolutely make me cry harder than I've ever cried to any other album this year. And yeah, I'm forewarning you, if you're going to listen to this album, get yourself a box of tissues, because there's a lot of themes about love, loss, relationships, as well as Laura's newfound life as a mother and some of the themes within that. And I just think she does it well, and not many singer-songwriters are doing it as well as she is. Alright, coming in at number 5 spot, the top 5, we have Beth Gibbons with Lives Outgrown. Speaking of beautiful, man, these instrumentals on this album are just way too beautiful for words. And Beth Gibbons is someone who rarely misses. She doesn't come out with a project often, but almost every time she does, whether it's a solo project or a project with Portishead, she never misses. Her voice just sounds transcendental, heavenly, and gorgeous. Even at nearly 60 years old, she's still killing it on this album vocally, and just the arrangements that it goes with are just incredible. Even without some of the jazzy aesthetics from her first collab album she did about 20 years ago, this is still an album that is just too beautiful for words sonically. And lyrically, this album just does an insane job at tackling on themes of mortality and also just life proceeding without you, without expecting it. Do you see a similarity here? No, in the case of this album, Beth is doing it from the perspective of an aging artist, a person who is obviously getting older and could be going closer and closer to death, and wondering those things, wondering what happens when we die, what happens to the rest of the world when we die, and who will continue to live on when it comes to the people who are close to us and the people we love. Who knows? But if there's one thing this album does not do, it does not try to make any sort of confirmations on answers. And another thing this album doesn't do is disappoint, and that's why it's landing in the top 5 spot. Coming in at the number 4 spot, we have Geordie Greep with The New Sound. Man, even though Black Midi is now no more, who cares when Geordie Greep has still absolutely got it on this album with its elements of art rock, post rock, jazz rock, gospel, experimentation. It's all over this album. There's just so much fun to be had in the instrumentation, yet so much chaos that's all controlled, so much exuberance, so much vibrance, and just so much going on. This is just an album that really showcases Geordie's true talents, his true aspirations as an artist, a proper artist, an artist's artist. And on top of that, some of the lyrical themes of this album that tackle on elements of narcissism, depression, as well as unrealistic or dangerous sexual fantasies as ways to compensate for certain mental problems is just insane. I don't know any other artists other than Geordie who could come out with lyrical themes like that and be doing it as well and saying some of these lyrics with a straight face. Songs like Holy Holy, which is one of the most colourful songs I've heard this year, Tara, which is one of the most unexpectedly beautiful songs I've heard this year, as well as The Magician with its insane storytelling, and the cliffhanger at the end is just incredible. I love almost every inch of this album, and even though it's not a Black Midi album, it may as well be, because Geordie Greep has always been, to me, the main star of Black Midi. And of course, as talented as Cameron Picton and Morgan Simpson, who is still featured on this album, are, it's really on most of this album where Geordie Greep's main focuses as an artist is put on full display here, and I love it to bits. Okay, coming in at the number 3 spot, we have Vampire Weekend with Only God Was Above Us, which I think is their best album to date. While some of the highs on this album may not be quite as high as some of the highs on Modern Vampires of the City, such as Step or Helen Hunt or Unbelievers, this album is Vampire Weekend's most consistent to date. The instrumentation is consistently dense, colourful, vibrant, beautiful, well-produced. The lyrical themes of this album that tackle on themes of war, transgenerational trauma, as well as just generational wars itself is just crazy. Ezra is in his songwriting bag on this album, as is his vocals that sound great, and I love the ending of this album, the way it kind of ties in some of these themes of some of the dispossessions as well as negatives in this world. But yet, at the same time, despite some of the negative lyrics on this album, the instrumentation just kind of gives off the opposite vibes. They sound beautiful. They sound, again, very layered, multifaceted, so many different genres coming together, but at no point does it sound messy or chaotic or all over the place. It just sounds great to listen to, every bit of this album. And that's why I love it, and I think it's Vampire Weekend's best album, or at the very least, most consistent album to date. Alright, coming in at the number 2 spot. At number 2, we have, of course, Charli XCX with BRAT. Man, We all couldn't escape BRAT's summer this year, and for good reason. One, this album is super catchy, this album is super vibrant, this album is dynamic, this album is fun, this album can be played at the club, it can be played in the car, on the aux, it can be played in the bedroom, if you know what I'm talking about. It can just be played in so many different settings, but this album also has personality. It's not just a whole compilation of ear candy, which it still would have been great if it was, but this album actually has some pretty serious lyrical themes going on, themes of depression as well as baby fever, Charli questioning her place as an artist and some perceptions she's having from other artists as well, to insecurity she has both an artist and as a person, what she should do. There's just so much to this album, even though it may not seem like it. There's so much depth to this album lyrically and instrumentally, yet it all just sounds incredibly fun to listen to from start to finish. This album to me kind of sounds like the full, complete culmination of all these experimental pop, hyper pop musical movements we've been seeing the last few years, helped curated by artists such as A.G. Cook and the late great Sophie, which the Sophie tribute on this album is spectacular and very tear-jerking as well. A.G. Cook's production is nailed on this record, and yeah, I'm just so happy that I get to be living in a time where some of the best pop music in history is coming out, or at least where we're seeing massive movements in the pop music industry that so many people seem to be getting on board with so much. It's creating a phenomenon where even Kamala Harris's unsuccessful presidential campaign was helped sugar-coated by this album. That just says a whole lot about its cultural influence and impact, and it's just an amazing album overall. But it's not quite my album of the year. My album of the year for 2024, at the #1 spot, it is Magdalena Bay with Imaginal Disc. What else is there to say about this album? Not only has this album got everything you want out of a pop album, being catchy, linear, great performances, soaring choruses, and some great songwriting, but there's just so much depth, so much details within this album production-wise, from the synths to the harmonies, the chord progressions, the instrumental layers, and the arpeggios. So much. Something about Matt's production that just brings out some of the best elements of some of the most straightforward pop music you could imagine, but just amplifying it like it's on steroids, but in the best way possible. On top of that, this album's lyrical themes as well of acceptance, as well as finding a new self, and also coming to terms with either a new self or that old self or true self that you may not be fully happy with, or that you may think that some people are having negative thoughts on, but it's really just, it's really who we are. We cannot fully change ourselves, even if we wanted to. We can't fully reinvent ourselves as a new person, but what we can do is find those aspects of our life that we currently have right now and just enjoy them. Just be part of it. The journey this album takes you on is like a movie. I haven't heard a pop album this cinematic in, God, I don't know how long. And just, it's a very smart, very well-crafted album that I cannot stress enough. And every time I listen to it, I'm just discovering more. And yes, I do mean that in the sense where I'm uncovering more and more details with the instrumentation and the lyrics. And yeah, this is easily not only my favorite album of this year, but one of the best albums I've heard this decade. And I loved their debut album, and I didn't know if they were going to top it, but they most definitely did. And I'm still excited for their next album, because this album is not like a loopy cycle like their debut. It kind of leaves this album on a cliffhanger where, yeah, we are our true selves and this is where we are, but is that always a good thing? Maybe we won't know. And that's the way this album ends on the closing track, the amazing and catchy closing track, by the way, which, man, there's just so many catchy hooks on this album. It's insane. Oh my God, 22 more minutes on. That's my flow. We call it killing time. Just so much to it. I cannot stress enough how amazing this album is and why it easily makes it as my #1 album of 2024. It's the only album this year I gave a 10 out of 10 for crying out loud, and one of few I have this decade. So yeah, that's why. But anyway, that's going to wrap up my list and wrap up all my music-related videos for 2024. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, follow my TikTok if you haven't yet. Tell me what you thought of this list and what are some of your favorite albums of this year. But until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.